Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Phil Goddard from Bourne Environmental Review. Thank you for tuning in whenever and wherever you're watching this. It is being recorded on December 19th, 2022, as we approach the end of another very quick year. My special guest today is Terri Guarino, the town of Bourne Health Agent. And thank you to Terri for doing a Zoom version where we wanted to get information out, kind of late breaking information that's been in the newspapers recently. As folks who watched the show over the years know, this is an environmental review show, and we can't get much more attuned to the topics that I've talked about on the show over the years than wastewater issues in the town of Bourne and on the Cape. And most importantly right now, there are new regulations being proposed, or changes to existing regulations, I should say, on nitrogen loading, and that affects folks on the southern side of the bridge, predominantly in Pocasset, Monument Beach, Katamet area down that way because of nitrogen in the embayment. So Terri's been kind enough to join us, and I have some questions that we're just going to go through, kind of get the basics. This is going to be a truncated show, but wanted to get this out to folks and have it on the DTV website because not everybody can make the evening meetings that was held recently. The Board of Health had a meeting to talk about the changes to Title V regulations. So welcome, Terri. Thank you for joining me today in this information session. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Phil. I'm so happy to be here.
You were featured Friday in the Bourne Enterprise with comments that you made. I witnessed at the meeting. So let's just kind of start with the basics. What is this issue that's going on right now? What is Title V? What's going on? For those of us out here, or those of you in the audience who may not understand why all of a sudden people are talking about nitrogen and your septic system, and you're hearing rumors about very expensive upgrades. Kind of give an overview of what's going on.
Yeah, so Title V is the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, which sets the framework for on-site sewage disposal systems, design, construction, maintenance, and inspection requirements of them. So Title V, you've heard about it for many, many years. It's been around since the 70s, since the mid 70s. And then before that, you had Article 2 of the State Sanitary Code in the early 60s. And before that, these on-site sewage disposal systems were just really under like local rule and regulation. But there's a bunch of proposed changes to them that are concerning to residents of Barnstable County, and will have an impact on individual towns and individual communities within those towns as it moves forward. So,
well, the impetus behind all of this is, as I understand, that there are regulations, federal regulations flowing to state regulations, that over the decades, the state and or the county and the towns have had to come up with plans for how to manage wastewater and the resulting effluent discharges into embayments, which are like harbors and things, for decades, but haven't really kept up with maintaining those plans. And there was a lawsuit by an environmental organization that really put a lot of pressure specifically on the Cape to come up with these 208 plans, which is the reference to the section in, I believe, the federal law. And, they weren't necessarily wrong. I mean, for my understanding is that for decades, the towns we all kind of knew that the Cape was developing very rapidly in the 70s, 80s. And that's why the Cape Cod Commission was formed, to kind of look at the macro growth and what can we really absorb. And there's not a lot of sewering on the Cape other than the urban areas like Hyannis and Buzzards Bay and some of the other areas in Mashpee Commons, for example. But mostly we're on septic system, right, on the Cape. So it's sandy soil, and it's just your own, in some cases, cesspools from, 100 years ago. I mean,
yeah.
And the concern is that, if I have it right, that was sort of the recent impetus behind all the towns looking at what are they going to do? Because now they're under scrutiny and requirements in a lawsuit or a settlement, right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, essentially, yes. There were two towns on the Cape that were pushed in that direction due to some litigation, but we're all subject to that Section 208 plan under the Federal Water Act, which is significant because the primary water quality problem that we have here on Cape Cod is stemming from nitrogen contamination. And 85% of that nitrogen contamination comes from individual on-site septic systems. So it's a huge issue within our region, and it's impacting our water bodies. So
how does it impact the water bodies? Why? What is the problem with nitrogen?
Well, it can cause a lot of different issues, degradation of it. There can be a death in eelgrass population, can affect those critical habitats for fish. There can be undesirable increases in what are known as like macroalgae. So these are less beneficial than the eelgrass, but they're still important. So decreases in dissolved oxygen concentrations, these are all things that are really just threatening aquatic life, basically.
Yeah. Not good. If low oxygen, the fish die. Algae take over. Red tide is a form of algae. We've seen these things before. So ponds are probably really acutely affected in Mashpee. A lot of kettle ponds in the Cape. So when you have a lot of houses around a small pond, all of a sudden the algal blooms start going and fish. It stinks, and it's just not a healthy system, right?
That's another thing too, is that it can have those obvious unpleasant side effects. The water body can have an obvious scum layer, have an unpleasant odor, so that you're not using it for the recreational purposes that we love, the residents of Cape. If your house is on that water body and you can't swim in it, it has a lot of other impacts to the community too.
So there's a standard that we're trying to meet in each area, so that the state and the county and the towns have all looked at, okay, there are these areas that are under the most serious threat. And there was a map that was put out with lots of color on it, and it showed these nitrogen sensitive areas. Finney Harbor is one. What are the ones in Bourne? Finney Harbor, where else?
So in Bourne, we have the Finney Harbor watershed. And then there's the Megansett-Squatigue watershed, which is shared with Falmouth. And those are the two watersheds that have TMDLs for total nitrogen.
And what is TMDL?
That stands for the total maximum daily load. So that is a studied, evaluated, established daily load of total nitrogen. So for Finney Harbor, we're looking at the goal of removing 1,700 kilograms of nitrogen per year. And Megansett-Squatigue, in comparison, is less for how it's shared, and the level of degradation on it is Bourne's portion is 600 kilograms nitrogen a year for removal. So these
is that measured in a daily concentration per gram that goes from your system into the embayment, or how it leaches out? That's how it's measured, as a daily concentration, and you add that up as a mass balance.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What is so we have a number in Finney Harbor. X concentration from each system is what you need to meet, that would then cumulatively for the entire watershed get us below where we need to be on a daily basis, which compounds to an annual reduction of the 1,700, for example, in Finney Harbor you're talking about, basically, right? Okay. So there are technologies that are designed to reduce or denitrify your septic system, and there's a list. So what they're hearing, there's two ways we can go. A community can say, the town of Bourne can say, we're going to get a watershed permit for this area or for the whole town, and the town would then say, we got this, residents of Bourne, Finney Harbor, Megansett, Squatigue, or Squatigue in this case, Bourne. We're going to come up with, we have 20 years to come up with a plan, the sewer or something like that. But the town would take over and file a watershed permit. That's one option. The second option is, oh, okay, the town isn't going to do it. And when these regulations pass, there's a 5-year time window in which the resident has to upgrade their system to meet a certain standard with certain approved technologies. Is that about the general decision tree?
Those are the two paths within the proposed regulations, yes. Because essentially what the amendments to Title V have done is it adds a new definition for a natural resource area, nitrogen sensitive area. And those are those watersheds that have TMDLs for nitrogen. So we know that those are impaired watersheds. And that is the key proposed amendment to Title V right now.
So we don't know whether the town, and I asked the question, the selectmen were there the other night. There's no decision on when or if the selectmen, the Board of Selectmen, the select board are going to decide whether to go for a watershed permit or not. It sounded like they were undecided. So where are we with these regulatory updates? It's still a comment period through January 30th, I understand.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they've got to promulgate it and they got to respond to all the comments. So sometime in 2023, theoretically, they would be promulgated, which means, adopted and formally become the code in the state of Massachusetts. You see that happening in 2023?
It is evident that that is what they are trying to do, but there has been a lot of confusion and questions put forward. So we are certainly grateful that they've extended this comment period to allow communities for more time to respond. But there still are so many unknowns within them. You've got the amendments to Title V, and then the second part, the watershed permitting that you've mentioned, is actually a complete new set of regulations. So a separate code.
Yeah, and in that decision, whether we apply for it, I understand what the conversation was the other night, is that we, meaning the Wastewater Advisory Committee, is doing a cumulative or comprehensive wastewater management plan that would inform the select board whether or not they should go for a watershed permit. And that's not done yet, is that correct?
That's correct. It is not done yet. And that is something that the town has been working on for a number of years. So these watershed permits are voluntary, but it is a prerequisite to have an approved wastewater management plan. So that would be approved by Mass DEP in order to apply for the Mass DEP watershed permit. Because
so if the clock ticks, like say they pass them in June. So theoretically, how much time did they give the community to decide whether they want to file the watershed permit so that the homeowner knows whether or not they're going to be on the hook or that there's a sewer coming on the side of the bridge?
As the regulations are proposed today, they mentioned an 18-month time period for a community to file a notice of intent that they intend to proceed with the watershed permit. There's a lot of questions as to that too, what is needed for a community to even file for that notice of intent within 18 months.
I'm a homeowner tracking this, and at the end of the 18 months, the town, we're just not going to do that. We're going to let the homeowner solve the problem. Then do I have 5 years from that point in time, or is it 5 years minus the 18 months to get my system operated?
That's a great question. It probably would depend on whether or not the town actually filed that notice of intent or not.
Yes, say they said no. We've been waiting. I haven't upgraded my system. Joe homeowner, Phil homeowner. Been waiting to see what the town does, because if the town says we're going to do the permit, then the town's going to take care of it. Otherwise, why would I upgrade my system if the town's going to? So at the end of the day, the town says we gave it our best shot. We can't make the 18 months, and we've just decided we're not going to do it definitively. And so then now do I have the full 5 years to get my system upgraded?
The way that the text read, if those watersheds that the properties reside in already were designated with the TMDL, then it would be 5 years from the promulgation of the regulations in there.
So we lose that 18 months. So it's kind of, the clock's ticking both ways. So I guess one way to look at it is, you want to hedge your bets, you could research options. So let's talk about technology. And this is where the rumor mill starts going. It could be $30,000, could be 50,000. I got to rip up my front lawn. I've got to do all this sort of stuff. And there's best approved control technology back. I mean, is there a way for the homeowner to get a sense of where they fit? Grandfathering, I heard that mentioned a lot. So is there a way to say, I've got a pretty new system? Oh, your system looks pretty good. You're a low impact, even though you're in this quote area. Is there a way to get kind of an estimate, or could I do a hybrid? Can I do a retrofit? How do I get those questions answered? Or when can I? You may not have the answers right now.
Right. So those are all outstanding questions, and I do wish that I had the answers for you specifically, but the state has given us not so much information to work with as part of their information sessions. There was only so much.
Gotcha.
So I can say, to somewhat summarize, that there are 2 watersheds in Bourne that have TMDLs established for total nitrogen that will be subject to these regulations and their amendments should they be put into effect by Mass DEP. There are also other watersheds which have been identified as being nitrogen impaired, but they do not have a TMDL designation. There are what's known as the 303D list watersheds, where there has been measurable issues due to nitrogen pollution, but they haven't gone through that formal process to get the TMDL. Those are watersheds which are priority watersheds, and how those will be implemented within these regulations, there's a lot of points of confusion with that, with the whole scientific process and whatnot. So there is some confusion about those other watersheds. I don't want to make it sound like really only 2 parts of Bourne will be affected.
Oh,
there's
okay. It could be the others too.
There are others which there are documented nitrogen pollution, and we've identified that within our CWMP, but they don't have that TMDL yet.
Who sets that? The state does that, or the town, or the county?
That's the TMDLs were funded in the past, and we did express interest in it, but it's not something that I think that is going to be done moving forward. So
who does it? Is it the state that would?
It was done through the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth School for Marine Sciences and Technology, the USGS. It was Cape Cod Commission, Applied Coastal Research and Engineering. So there were big studies that were done.
Right. But that's the impetus of that. Is the town of Bourne spending money? Is that on your checklist to do, or is the state working its way through the other areas of Bourne for us to come up with the level? Is there somebody working on that, or is it our efforts?
They aren't funded right now.
Okay. But if it were, it would be them doing it.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
So reading, let's see.
So
for Pocasset Harbor, as an example, that is a nitrogen impaired watershed. When the TMDL was developed for, sorry, I don't know this. Finney's Harbor, they identified concerns with the Pocasset Harbor watershed as well. So as of right now, we have numbers that we put together with our CWMP to address that, but there isn't a total maximum daily limit requirement for it right now. So those other watersheds, it's not clear how they'll fit into those regulations.
Right. But it sounds like it's not a nitrogen sensitive area, NSA. It could down the road, 5 years from then, they would be in the same boat that the people in Phineas Harbor and Squatigue are. How do I know if I'm specifically affected? It looks like you zoom in on this map, it kind of follows one road or another. People are starting to look at parcel by parcel. Oh, I missed it. I'm 10 feet over the line this way. Is it that precise, or how would you know? I know I live on Phineas Harbor, so I'm pretty darn sure I'm affected. But people up in Clay Pond by 28, there may be are there some homes that are not affected?
This is one of the primary comments that I have on these proposed regulation amendments and the new watershed regulations to Mass. That the map that they produced was only put out in November of 2022, and it doesn't have any identifying features in it. So there's no roadways, there's no ponds or lakes or streams. So you can't really look at that map, even with your own familiarity, and zoom in to see if you're affected. Luckily, the town of Bourne does have, under their CWMP resources on the webpage, one of the appendices has a list of parcel by parcels and what address is within what watershed. You do have to do some digging to get to that, but that is at least something that we can offer because the state has not made a better resource available, and it's not one that we have locally at that level.
So if you find that address in that report, which is under the Wastewater Advisory Committee, analysis is called an analysis. If you find your address in that report, it's a good chance that you're going to be affected by this regulation coming up to upgrade your system.
Definitely if you're located within the Megansett-Squatigue watershed or the Phineas Harbor watersheds, which do have those final TMDLs. Those we know right now. Other watersheds within the report goes over different alternatives analysis that nothing's finalized with that report yet, but that's all up there too, where the town was weighing the best possible strategies for those.
So before we close, I want to make sure, folks, there's a lot of information on the Town of Bourne Board of Health website with updates, and you have a special area on your website, I believe, for all of this, correct? So that the folks track this. And then there's one on the Wastewater Advisory Committee, which is part of the overall town's look at. That includes looking at upgrading the sewage treatment plant in conjunction with other towns in and around Mass Maritime Academy, I would presume, as well. There's a master plan. And then there's the Town of Bourne, Buzzards Bay upgraded system that came online recently. So there's a lot the Town of Bourne's done to lead the way. On the south side of the bridge, there's no sewer. So now we're dealing with, do you get, and these are questions you can't answer, but I think this is feedback to the state. And you pointed out to try to get this done in the time frames that the state has put out there. I mean, thousands and thousands of homeowners are going to be affected. You would be full-time reviewing. The Board of Health would have an agenda that's probably filled with 30 systems a month. That you just do the math, right? How would you get all of this done for approval? And then the contractors, and then you have to have regular testing on this going forward. Is this a feasible practice? Is that one of your primary concerns that you mentioned in the paper that the board is going to comment to the state about?
Right. Yeah. The time frame for it just isn't reasonable, and it's definitely alarming and concerning to our residents and to the contractors. I mean, there aren't enough engineering firms as is right now without these new amendments. Just to handle the necessary upgrades and new construction, our workforce is really struggling. So materials, you hear about delays in materials and price increases with just about everything nowadays. And that's something that's going to be affected by this too, do these technologies, if they're a small manufacturer, do they have the ability to produce and distribute? And lots of them even install the technologies themselves. Do they have the ability to do that to meet demands? Are there enough personnel within the towns?
Right.
Are there enough wastewater operators to do operation and maintenance agreements and to do follow up on the treatment and supervision for them? So there's a lot of things that have not been figured out. And, the local health departments are here to work with its residents. And We will continue to do that, but there's certainly a lot of information within these regulations that is confusing, and that will be the majority of our comments probably to the state on them, is that it is somewhat redundant and conflicting and confusing, and perhaps not the best approach to try to force communities to get watershed permits when we've all been working on these CWMPs for decades in implementing different strategies. So we're working on it.
You're leaving the homeowner also in this very tenuous position, especially if you're trying to sell your home. You don't know whether people are going to say, I need you to lower the price because of this. Also, what if I do everything right? I get the system designed, you approve of it, but I can't get anybody to put it in, and it's 4 years, 11 months, and 15 days, and the clock runs out. What's going to happen? Am I going to get a fine from the town of Bourne Board of Health? Is the state going to put a lien on my house? Am I going to go to jail? I mean, I have no idea. What are the penalties if I don't get it done in 5 years, but I've done it? I've got a permit, but I can't, nobody can come down and build the system. I mean, what is the response from the state? You don't know, but they've got to think process. They've got to think practicality. They've got to think flexibility. What if, I would ask you to take a look at this. I may write my comment in personally that what if the Board of Health or the Wastewater Advisory Committee had a way of working with the watershed, say, East Harbor watershed, that met the same loading reduction goals, but with a unique set of regulations and targeted hotspot reductions and assistance to those that have, say, cesspools or something like that, but it got to the same goal. Is that going to be satisfactory to the state? Is the goal the real goal, or is it now we're just going to make everybody do something because we want to make everybody do something?
Well, Phil, that is precisely what these comprehensive wastewater management plans are, that all the communities have either in the works, or they're already approved by Mass DEP, or they're approved and they've been implementing projects on them. They are a specific watershed-based solution to these problems. And within those watersheds, as a part of it, you do the needs analysis, which has been talked about a lot recently, identifying the difference in residential versus commercial. Are there any agricultural sources that might be causing a significant load to the embayment? What's the stormwater infrastructure in here? What do we have? Surface water supplies,
fertilizer use. I'd be willing to ban the fertilizer.
Golf courses, with
horses,
heavy
right?
Fertilizer,
right.
Exactly. Identifying it all on a specific watershed basis and finding the best solution on a local level for those individual watersheds. That's what the communities are doing
right
with those CWMP plans.
Okay, so with that regard, that there's this tension here that the towns have been working on these, but now they're going to have a limited time to finish them, to wrap it up. Let's just say they have a plan that says, look, we're not going to go for a watershed permit, but we have a solution within our watershed to help the homeowners, and we've identified a set of factors short of storing the entire south side of Bourne. Is that negotiable with the state, or is it black and white? And that sounds like it's still to be determined. If I have that correct, is that fair to say?
Agree. Yeah,
okay.
to be determined.
Yeah. They need to think these through a little bit more, because I upgraded in 1980. We went to a Title V system. We had a cesspool. A lot of people on Monument Beach have had a cesspool. Probably some still do. And so now, do I get any credit for having a better system? Or is there less of a retrofit impact to me than someone who has to start from scratch? Or, and just so folks know, these new systems, they're going to inject air into a media that's feed bacteria that then break down the nitrogen into a gas that, rather than go into the water, it dissipates in the atmosphere, which is mostly nitrogen anyway, or a significant portion. But now you got a little electric bill that's going to run a blower. You've got to do testing. So it's not like, I just put a new tank in and then I forget about it. It's like you're a wastewater treatment plant.
Well, essentially, most residential properties have conventional Title V systems, which are gravity based.
Right.
So there's no pumping or equipment necessary for the majority, let's say, of residential on-site systems. So yes, Phil, like what you're saying is that you are going to have to add electrical and additional plumbing to accommodate it. And it is something that runs. There's a lot of different types, but you mentioned a blower unit, and those are aerobic treatment units. So it takes a septic tank, which conventionally is an anaerobic digestion process, and you're adding air to it to help with the denitrification. So there's a lot of different components and moving parts than something that is just gravity based as a soil absorption system, essentially. So
and you're gonna have to be required to show testing. That's the other part of this that's missing, is that's an expense, and then you have to have someone coming out on a regular basis, annual, semi-annual, to say, okay, my system's working. It's getting to the achievement, achieving the goals that were set for it in the design. Whereby right now I'm pumping out, on a regular basis, keeping my system maintained in good working order. But this is another level of oversight and management that people may not be used to. As we wrap up here, Terri, thank you. There's a lot to be unfolded here. You're going to post regularly on your website, I presume, updates. The final comment package that the board submits is going to be posted, I presume, right? And then are the Board of Selectmen submitting separate comments, or are they folded into the Board of Health's comments?
I believe that the Board of Health will be submitting comments on behalf of the town. And there has been talk about scheduling another joint session between the two boards to kind of go over and explain those comments, but we do not have a date figured out for that yet. I suppose it would probably be in the next couple of weeks to meet, the target deadlines. So
a suggestion on the website, if you could kind of list the technologies and typical systems and typical solutions and typical impacts, if some way people could just get that and start understanding what may be coming down the road for them, where to go, kind of, even if you had a simple 1, 2, 3 step type of thing that people would, okay, first see if you're infected are you in one of these watersheds that's now designated, yes or no? And here's where you find that. And you go, okay, I'm over in Pecasset. I've got a pass for now, but it may not be forever, as you mentioned. But okay, I'm in Finney's Harbor. Okay, now what would this mean for me? Okay, here's the 4 types of technologies. I could start talking to a consulting engineer, and they could just give me a preliminary estimate. Or, hey, you don't need the full thing. If you just added this one little gizmo, that may get you to where you want to go. So yeah, a lot of uncertainty. This is not what people want to hear. Why they put out a regulatory change with comment periods in the middle of the holiday season is beyond me. That's just ridiculous. Hopefully, they've extended them to January 30th, like you said. So I presume the other towns in the Cape, a lot of green that's shown on that map. So I presume other towns are having similar conversations. And so DEP is going to hear from lots of boards of health about, practicality, implementability, cost, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you, Terri, for that. A lot more to come down on this to help the homeowners decide. This was a quick breaking news Bourne Environmental Review show. Thank you so much, Terri. I would say we'll look for further articles and updates on your webpage. I'd be happy to have you back if there's more information or a time that you feel would be good to have you back and go into more detail. But I think for most folks that were in this boat, I've been sharing this information. Be aware, it's not tomorrow. It could be 5 years, but start thinking about it because this is something that's been around for decades. We've kind of known this was coming down at some point. I don't know if the select board are going to say, let's sewer the south side of the Cape, that, south side of Bourne. That may still happen, or is that completely off the table?
That south side of the Cape as a whole, Phil, that really is.
No, I know it's the Bourne, south side of Bourne, I meant.
Right. And that really isn't something that would be feasible. It would be more so centralized systems with something that has been looked into a part of the CWMP to have, more so like cluster systems or hooking up to existing infrastructure for facilities that are already in use within the community that may have additional capacity, things like that.
That's a great example. There's a great example. We'll end on this. You've got the Pizza by Evan parking lot, the whole complex up there. And you get the new potential fire station on Clay Pond Road that's probably going to have a system. So maybe Phineas Harbor folks could, do a mini system that kind of comes down to there. You've got the military base with their plant. So I hope that the state hears what you're saying and comes up with a creative solution that may solve the problem in a smart way that isn't going to be a one solution for everybody, that folks are going to, as it was pointed out, meaning you're talking $50 million of impact to the communities for those two watersheds, if I understood correctly. That's pretty significant, to say the least. So thank you. Have a wonderful holiday season. And www.townofbourne.com, the website. Go to the Department of Board of Health. Thank you to Bourne TV, Jen, and all the staff, Elaine, everybody there, for a great job, another great year. And happy holidays to everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Happy holidays.